Hi, welcome to this sponsored episode of the Media Copilot, presented by Descript. I'm your host, Pete Pachal. I cover tech for a long time as a journalist, and now I have deep conversations with the media people, the builders, and the creators who are all trying to answer the question, how will we get information in the future? And how will that change the jobs and the industries whose business is information, especially media? My guest this week is Laura Burkhauser, CEO of Descript. So every media team right now is trying to answer a set of questions that are straightforward, but the answers are increasingly difficult. And the main one is, how much AI should we bring into production? So that question alone leads to many more questions, such as which parts of the workflow are safe to automate? How do we use these tools without flattening voice or lowering quality or losing editorial control? And how do we avoid stacking one vendor on top of another just to record, to transcribe, edit, clip, caption, summarize, etc., and publish a single piece of media? That last part really matters. A lot of newsrooms and comms teams and branded content teams aren't just suffering from too few tools, they are suffering from too many. One tool for recording, another for transcription, another for editing. The list goes on. And the promise of AI is supposed to be you're going faster, you have better quality, and you have more leverage. But in practice, it can also create more complexity, especially if your workflows aren't entirely thought out. So that's why I'm excited to talk to Laura today. Descript is one of the companies trying to rethink what media production looks like when AI is actually built into the workflow rather than just kind of bolted on afterward. So this isn't a conversation just about one product. It's a conversation about how audio and video production are changing and how bigger teams should think about workflows and how the interface for making media may become less about individual tools and more about what teams want to create. So we're going to talk about where Descript fits into that shift, what newsrooms and media orgs should know if they haven't used it or looked at it in a while, and what responsible AI looks like when the output isn't just, that one single piece of content. Laura Burkhauser, welcome to the Media Copilot.
Hi, Pete. Thanks so much for having me.
Sure, it's my pleasure. So let's get into it. Let's get into Descript. As I understand it, it started as a very specific idea, editing audio and video via text. Now it feels more like, it's a full production system. How would you describe the company's evolution, and what has changed the most since generative AI became central to the product or integrated into the product?
Yeah. So Descript has been AI native since we were founded several years ago. And that's because the concept of editing video like a text is itself AI. Editing video like a document is itself AI. So the way that Descript works fundamentally, or like our core feature fundamentally several years ago was, you record something like this. It's going to be a 40-minute long video podcast. And in the old world, you would go into a timeline and do a lot of cutting and splicing, a lot of work on audio and cutting out all of my filler words. Well, many of them, maybe not all of them. And
Manually doing it too, like literally putting little
exactly,
places and stuff.
yeah, magnifying in, and I think like if you talk
Oh,
to
yes.
kind of sound engineers, they'll tell you like, I know what looks like on a timeline. I could draw it for you, right? And so Descript said, well, what if you could edit things like you edit a doc? And that doesn't just mean deleting filler words or deleting things like retakes, but also copying and pasting, moving things around. And so that was kind of the initial idea. Then Descript acquired a company called Lyrebird, which does AI audio generation, and brought that in as a research team to bring more AI into the product. And there, if you think about the things you do with a document, you can cut, you can copy and paste, you can also write. And so we were one of the first products to provide text to voice, where you can write new paragraphs, or you can, in my voice, if I use the wrong name, if you pronounce my name wrong, you can actually regenerate it again without having to re-record. So those are some of the original features that we went to market with and immediately
Nice.
achieved product market fit, especially in media. And so some of our longest running customers are actually customers in some of the biggest, most noteworthy newsrooms that you know. And that's because in addition to being kind of like editing video like a document, we also had collaboration in from the very beginning. And so it's like editing video like you would edit a Google Doc, right? Where someone in your newsroom may know the hell out of the story, but like you have someone else who's really like a legal expert and understands the things that you can and can't say. You have an editor who's coming in and checking the work. You have a copy editor who's coming in, and they all bring a different amount of expertise into this rough cut and eventually fine cut and eventually like polish step that you have towards making video. And so collapsing all of that collaboration together into a document that everyone can kind of see to do things like paper edits tremendously shortened the amount of time that it took to get from recording to publishing. And that's the foundation upon which Descript was built, and why I think to this day we are in most newsrooms and in some wall to wall. Every single person on the production team has a Descript subscription. Now, you asked about like what has changed because like technology has changed so much since that initial promise. And the biggest thing is, LLMs. So,
Hmm.
what's great is if you are able to edit video like a doc, and then LLMs come along. What are LLMs incredibly good at doing? Editing text. Well, we understood all video as text. And so having an LLM come in and be able to edit text really well kind of gives you multimodal editing for free. And then adding in captioning to all of our videos so you know what's happening on the screen every few frames, right? A dog walks by and we're able to say like dog walks by and store that as
Hmm.
text gives you visual understanding and real multimodal way before you can build like a multimodal model, which takes hundreds of millions of dollars and like, hundreds of researchers. Instead, we're able to get that to you like early a couple of years ago now, which is like way ahead of the times. And we were able to do that last year. We built an agentic co-editor, Underlord, because nobody needs an AI overlord, but couldn't you use an AI underlord? Underlord who can come in, take direction from you, and take kind of the first pass at editing.
Hope it doesn't ever vie for a promotion. But that all sounds really fascinating. Like just like the bets that you placed early ended up really paying off in the AI era because of how language models work. That's really interesting. Are there like specific features that editorial teams that really like that have zeroed in on why it ended up being popular for them? I imagine it probably varies a bit by the type of newsroom, if you are more broadcast versus more publishing, but
That's right.
give me some thoughts on like what really resonates with that crowd.
I mean, originally text-based editing itself is just huge, and collaboration, which isn't an AI feature, but it's just a great feature, being able to like all edit at the same time, leave comments, do approvals, things like that. But then, like, as video repurposing and turning one piece of media into the 17,000 pieces of media that you need to feed
Mm.
every single content maw across all of the publishers, using us for clips has been really exciting for folks. And I think like we have a button that creates clips, but clips is actually the feature that forced us to build Underlord. Because when we released clips, we had like a bunch of different kind of things you could set. We called parameters you could set, right? So you could say, like, I want this to be vertical. I want the clips to be about 30 seconds. I want you to use this layout that I've already created with my brand stuff and like look for clips about this subject, right? Those were the parameters you could add in. Well, immediately people had a bazillion other different parameters they wanted to add in. They were like, I want to create clips for every single one of my channels at the same time. When you do it, I want you to actually create a social clip about a social post about each of the clips at the same time. I want you to only choose clips where my guest is speaking. Don't include me in the clips that you're adding. And I'm like, well, this is so much direction that at this point we're not talking about buttons anymore. You need
Right.
a little underlord to yell at. And so what we that kind of led us to create this idea of underlord, which I think people really like. And then what you can do is now underlord has memory, so you can work with underlord once on like, look, when I say like go out and create clips, what I actually mean are all of these types of clips along with all with like this is the definition of like a publishing packet that I want you to create as part of that. And so now every time I tell you, go make clips, I want you to do those 50 different jobs that we like got right once. And that kind of totally changes your workflow for some people. And you're right, it doesn't work for everyone. But to really have Underlord do the first pass at everything, and then you go in and act as a reviewer and I think for a long time, and probably honestly forever, when we're talking about things where voice is really important, you go in and you change and you shift things and you add in the layer of things that makes it you. But Underlord can kind of do the perfunctory things that you might hire an intern to do.
Nice. So yeah, the clipping obviously huge these days, and it sounds like that's sort of the core of your maybe your value proposition to a lot of these media companies. But you tell me, like, is that when you sort of boil down like why someone would use your tool versus something else or a stack of things? Is it that a multimedia kind of like you can make more with a single piece of content more easily?
It really depends on the customer. I think that in like actual newsrooms, right? If you ask people what they love about Descript, it's not one-shotting editing jobs with generative AI. It is a fully functioning collaborative editor that uses AI to speed up the parts of your job that you don't like. But like my vision for newsrooms isn't like, oh, you should go from record to one-shotting everything. Like a lot
Mm,
lives in the editorial decisions that go into the rough cut of like if you think about like a long form audio podcast that you love like the obvious ones might be something like This American Life, but there's a million now.
mhm,
Like the number of audio, that's not just like a straight show like this. Like you and I are doing a chat show. Editing this is going to be pretty easy for your editor. And a lot of the magic comes from just like the interview that you and I are doing. Like I don't know how complex you get in your editing jobs. My guess is like this is a pretty quick editing job. And speed is what I would use to sell this to
right.
speed and repurposing all the clips is what I would do if I were selling to like your editor. If I'm selling to like NPR and they're doing a lot of like
Mm,
really high quality prestige like podcasts or video kind of things. I think like there, I'm talking about the depth of the editor. I'm talking about having your whole team in there. I'm talking about, yes, we have AI features that make things like way easier to do and save you hours and make you able to create a daily show instead of a weekly or a monthly show. But like every story I'm telling is about humans doing a lot of work in the
right.
editor. And I think that's because to create really high quality stuff, you just need humans doing work and making decisions. And like that's just something I stand by.
Right. So you have that inherently collaborative nature of the product, and now you have Underlord, which is a kind of a collaborator too, I would imagine, particularly
That's
since it has
exactly what I think about it
yeah.
as. Like Underlord is another editor in Descript with you that is able to do some editing that has its own area of expertise, which is not the same area of expertise that you might have, or that Steve from legal might have, or that your copy editor might have. And so thinking about Underlord not as someone that you're delegating work to in all cases, I think for like some people it can be that, but in newsrooms, like this is a media podcast, in newsrooms, I think like Underlord is more like a collaborator. Yeah.
And I'm glad you brought up memory. I'd like to chat a little bit just about today's models and like how the features are and the capabilities overall are just really accelerating. And, I'd like to sort of know, not just what sort of helps Descript, but sort of broadly what you're excited about as things are progressing. Memory, of course, is been around for a while, but it's been rapidly evolving. I know OpenAI just did some interesting stuff to make it more integrated in their product. I'm sure every other AI is going to fold that in somehow if they're not already. That just seems like a key way that things will evolve. Because memory, we think about it as like personalization for you, but in the case of a tool, it's personalization to the workflow and then someone's rhythm, because the way one person uses like the tool might be totally different from someone else's, and then it's like this different set of skills, et cetera. So talk a little bit about memory and sort of how the new models as they're evolving, what excites you the most.
Well, I think memory is really exciting. And I'll tell you a little bit about how it shows up in creative software like Descript. I think that one of the fundamental criticisms of AI is that AI is at its heart a derivative piece of technology. So, like the way that it works is it does a good job of predicting what might be a good thing to do. And the way that it predicts is it trains on like a huge amount of data. And that is a terrible way to create,
Hmm.
right? Like what if everything you created was fundamentally derivative? I mean, in some to some extent, I guess you could say, like, isn't it Laura? Drinks my tea. Sure. But but through this focus, through this lens of your unique perspective, like you go through life and intake all of this data and have these experiences and work on a voice. And out of that comes, we hope, as creators, something that's interesting enough that it stands out, right? And AI on its own will never do that
Hmm.
because it's fundamentally derivative. And however, What memory can do, which you talk about as being personalized to you, what memory can do over time is sort of begin to pick up on some of the nuances of the water you swim in and the context that you are in and the workflow and how you make things, that it stops being this like regression to the mean of the most boring way to edit a podcast or tell a story or write a document or paint a picture. And it can kind of understand like Laura's voice, Laura's priorities, the beats that Laura loves to hit in her stories, like the importance of authenticity and humor in the way that she comes through, that might make you make different editing choices than you would make for Pete and his storytelling. And so when Underlord can get a sense of your voice and your taste and your perspective, I think you start to get more excited about collaborating with it the same way you would with a real editor whose job is to help kind of like your voice, your vision shine. And like why you see the same creative teams work together over and over again is like, great, your collaborator gets it now. Like you get the vision, you get the context, you get the kind of thing I'm trying to make. Let's go make 4 more of these because you get it now. And I think that's the excitement of memory for me as in creativity.
Nice. It sounds like in terms of it being a collaborator, as you were talking about there, it's not even necessarily like a collaborator for, people who are professional editors and stuff. Like the whole text-based editing, it's a bit of a mental shift, but it's sort of making possible this video editing capability or, just broad multimedia capabilities for people who aren't professional editors. And I guess
Exactly.
that would inform like a question, like, how do you think about it in terms of like, the sort of ongoing, I don't even know if it's called a debate, but everyone, the discussion in society around like AI, is it here to help us? Is it here to replace us? How do you think about that? Does it help make teams more lightweight? Does it support them? Does it move certain things onto like maybe lightweight tasks onto non-professionals, all of it,
I
more,
think we
et
need
cetera?
to just absolutely throw out this concept of AI replacing humans. Like it's
Mhm.
wholesale. Like I don't want to hear about it anymore. I've been saying this for a while. I think like now it's finally catching some steam. So I feel less sheepish saying it in San Francisco. I do think that AI will replace some labor, which is very
Right.
different than saying that AI will replace humans, right? And so, like, the way that I think about it and the way that I've worked with my team on it and the way that I would encourage like creative people to work on it because you will come up with different answers than what me and my team came up with is to think about like list out the labor that you do to get
Mhm.
to the product that you make. Do you like doing all of that labor? My guess is you don't. So let's like separate them into a couple of buckets. And let's think about in the bucket of like labor you don't so much enjoy doing. How do you think about delegating this to AI, which you can't always do? Sometimes it's like, sorry, I know I too would love to delegate putting away my clothes to AI, but unfortunately I can't. That's a human job probably
Someday.
forever. But but okay, like how can I use AI to replace my labor with its labor
Mhm.
here? And then for the stuff that I enjoy doing, how can I use AI to enhance my ability to do this labor? I think there's like an enhancing bucket and a replacing bucket that probably follows patterns along different functions, but isn't like the same for every single person in the same function. And then I think like AI can help in both sides of the equations, but like we have a choice. We have a choice as individuals. We have a choice as organizations. We have a lot of choices for how we use AI. And I encourage everyone to use AI because I think it is foolish to just say like, "Hey, we have this thing that could make you so much more productive, and you're just not going to use it on principle." I like to me that feels like I don't own a computer. I prefer a typewriter where it's like, sure, as an affectation, that's hilarious, but like, come on. No one actually thinks it's a better way to work. So I think like AI is going to be part of every non affectatious life. But I think like how we use it is really going to depend on the function and on the person to some extent. And
For
I don't think it's
sure.
going to replace a single human.
Right. Yeah. Like it's more like you say, labor tasks. And to my knowledge, again, don't have the stuff in front of me, but the data is kind of supporting that. I would be curious though, what sort of you're seeing, whether it's data or anecdotes or whatever, with regard to the organizations you work with, as they got to use your tool over time. do you find they're doing like more things that like things they
Yeah.
weren't able to do before? Do the teams start to get reorganized a bit? Do they zero in? Just sort of what happens over time as people get acclimated to both the tool and also just working with the AI features?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, first, the way that I would talk about Descript's customers is we work with media teams and marketing teams. And we work with media teams all the way from a solo podcast to a national news, an international newsroom. And we work with marketing teams all the way from a solopreneur who is creating content to market their coaching business to some of the biggest enterprises in the world. But those are we kind of like we work with storytellers in media and marketing. Those are our main kinds of customers. And what we find that they're able to tell us is that because of Descript, people who normally cannot take part at all in the media editing or storytelling part of the equation are now able to help. And because of that, either like I can do marketing where I wasn't able to do it before, but really like the story is that we can do video where we couldn't do video before. So places saying like we stopped doing video as a team because it was
Mhm.
just too much. It was too much work. And so we were doing all text and maybe some audio, but like no video. So it's like, oh, we can do video now as like a content type that we moved from doing video once a month to being able to do a daily show. Or like if we're talking about an actual newsroom, like we were able to build where we were doing multiple daily shows. Doing a daily show is insane. And like the fact that you can do multiple of them and just have like one or two editors working on that is like that is unthinkable like in the podcasting world a decade ago, right? And
Mhm.
that's because of Descript. And so it's like that we can do it more often, that we can do video where we couldn't, that we can do video more often. And then, yes, that we can do video across many more channels, that we can do long form video and all of our short form clips, that we can do video that is tailored for all of these different channels where we need to go out and meet the customer because they aren't necessarily coming to our site anymore. And so, what I actually see is like a lot of media companies are actually moving to a world where, yes, they have like their own site, their own channel, but they also have a network of creators that you may never know is part of that media conglomerate because they just like work with all of these podcasters or these creators who are monetizing in the way that creators monetize through things like sponsorships, YouTube ads, and that the media company gets some portion of that, right? And so there are these new economic models being built on a creator economy that depends on being able to create video much faster and across many more channels. And so that's like the kind of newsroom that we are able
Yeah.
to create.
That sounds really interesting because it sort of dovetails with a lot of media strategy right now. It's sort of taking advantage of this creator economy, I guess, the economy and the systems and the ways that
The
they sort of
viewership.
execute. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's a little interesting merger of like, obviously, like you say, creators are doing it, but even the bigger companies want to sort of take that approach. It
They
feels like,
absolutely are. And
yeah.
that's critical to these more traditional media companies surviving in the age of new media is like you want to keep the brand recognition that you have. You want to keep the valuable asset that you have, but you need to start to go out and meet people where they are across all of the channels where they're consuming news, which is not necessarily your site.
Of course, the bigger companies, when you get to sort of enterprise level, they have a set of concerns around, liability and security and all these other things. Has that been a challenge at all? Sort of trying to address all those sort of things they want to do, like the
Every
SSO
startup
or
loves
whatever?
going enterprise. It's everyone's absolute favorite thing to do. Look, yeah. I think as a product manager, it is always hard for me to say, like, yeah, I don't want to go build, agent memory because, like, I would so much rather build Skim, which is like a permissioning solution for companies that need to let some teams do have access to some things and some teams not have access to other things. But I think if you had asked me 2 years ago, I would have been pulling my hair out about that problem. I think we've mostly crossed the chasm there and are able to offer mature enterprises all of the wonderful features that they would love. We also don't retain like data retention and stuff like that. We're very careful about different an enterprise company obviously like very private about their data. So I think like making sure that we're able to meet customers where they need to be met when it comes to things like data privacy, permissioning, and all of those other wonderful enterprise features that I just love building. I love building them.
If you don't mind getting into the weeds a bit, I'd like to ask you a little bit about like maybe some of the features that ended up being surprisingly important, if you know what I mean. Like as a sort of as I edit things and do my amateur hour stuff on podcasts or whatever, it depends on your passion for the material, of course, but you end up being kind of a perfectionist and things like chapters or like show notes or whatever, right?
Mm.
And so is there something that, particularly with AI features, because AI, the promise is always it gets you a certain percentage of the way there and the human takes it. Has there been a thing where it's like, surprisingly for most people, they really needed it to be 95% there, where we thought like 70 or 80, and then you work to perfect that? I don't know. I don't know if I'm expressing that properly, but it's kind of like the polish on some of these sort of creator features, I imagine there's a lot of iteration on it here and there, depending on the feedback you get from customers. So curious if anything in there stands out or if there anything was sort of surprising.
That's a good question. I think that I'm always humbled by customers. It's one of the things that I love about this job, I'll say, is that you have an idea of what people will use a feature for and how it's going to land, and then the data always humbles you, the interviews always humble you. So I've been surprised by many features. For me, maybe like something that's surprising when I was an amateur podcaster. So I actually found Descript through podcasting. I started a podcast with my friend and we used Descript to edit it, and I was like, "Oh my god, I think I have to work at this company. This is like the
Yes, you
coolest
didn't
thing
tell
I've
me
ever
you were a
used."
professional at this.
Yeah, no, I am
Yes.
definitely not. And but one of the features that I loved was remove filler words, because if you
Mm.
can't tell, unless Pete has kindly removed all of my filler words, there are a few. I use a few filler words,
I'd like to
and
keep
so
it real.
I. Well, exactly. So I was removing all my filler words,
Mm.
and then as soon as I joined Descript, I found out that there is a huge camp of podcasters that are pretty against removing filler words and actually pretty against a lot of the automated editing, just one click, don't think about it kind of
Mhm.
buttons that we created, like removing pauses. And they're like, look, when you get further into the editing game, you will realize the value of a pause and the value of a filler word and of retaining the integrity of the sentence the way that the person created it, which you don't always do. You never want to like embarrass your guest. You never want to, do you hear me, Pete? You never want to embarrass your guest. No, you never want to embarrass your guest. And so you do want to get rid of some of them, but it takes judgment. And so I
Mm.
think that's like that the more you talk to people who have been in the editing game for a long time and who are really working on like S tier, like the things that you love, that you have a ton of admiration for, the more you'll realize how much judgment goes into even something like that. Which ums do you remove? And
Mhm.
so that's where like automation, I think, can be really helpful for a lot of kinds of content. But it's where I don't lean a ton on automation when I'm talking to an experienced editor, because it just doesn't ring super true to them.
This reminds me of when Ben Affleck had that thought a couple years ago about AI not having taste.
Mm.
And I guess I would use, because I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said there about like the integrity, and sometimes you want it out, sometimes you don't, and that could even be in the same piece of media. And I'm curious, as sort of maybe by way of transitioning to looking forward, do you think we'll ever get there with AI? Like in terms of it being able to look at a conversation and think, pause right there would be great, and then it just kind of like leaves something in and just sort of applies a certain amount of taste to it. Maybe this is kind of getting, pretty advanced, but who knows? Maybe,
No,
new
I
models
I
come out every week, right? So,
I think yes, and that's what we're aspiring to build. But
hmm,
again, I think that that taste is not generic. Like when we talk about
agreed.
taste, we talk about it as like either you have it or you don't. And I think that's true up to a certain like bar. And I think like we can get AI up into that bar. But then like the question is like, is it interesting? Is it authentic? What is the taste? Taste to what end? And
Right.
I think that's where like it's all about who's driving the car. And so I do think that it will get better. I think that there's also going to be limits on like when it gets that good, will it get that good in a way that just like works with the business? Will it get that
Mm,
good in a way that is like boringly cost efficient, that works across all tools? So it's not just intelligence that is the bottleneck here, but certainly intelligence, the level of intelligence is a bottleneck. I think taste is eventually a solvable problem, but it won't fundamentally change the fact that taste plus an excellent human will still outperform generic taste every time.
mm. Yeah, that makes total sense. I'd love to just chat a little bit about sort of where the general trends in AI these days. There's been a bit of a, I guess you'd call it a backlash here and there, and I know
Oh, yeah.
it's a generalization, but people are getting booed at graduation speeches. There seems to be, whether it's generational, I don't even quite know how to think about the various dimensions of this, but it's no doubt there's sort of a phenomenon out there. I guess thinking about the people that you talk to and creatives, which have always sort of had a sect of them that have been skeptical of AI. Like, how do you hear all that criticism? What do you think is fair? What isn't? And then how do people, particularly at the AI companies, like get wrong about how to talk about AI, particularly to this demographic of creatives, writers, editors, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think that the way that people talk about AI in San Francisco is absolutely insane and so alienating and like inaccurate, but it's like whatever, people are always inaccurate, but it feels like self-defeatingly inaccurate in a way that if you have any kind of connection to reality, if you have any relatives who don't live here that you respect and talk to, you're just like, what? I'm sorry, why is the leader of every lab walking around saying, someone should stop me? Oh my God, I'm building this really dangerous thing that's going to ruin democracy and kill everyone. Someone should stop me. And then, like, is surprised that people are like, oh, I'm super freaked out. You should stop building this. This is a bad thing. It's like, you're giving us the talking points, dude. Stop telling us that you're building bad things. You're freaking everyone out. I don't understand. I kind of understand it. You want to feel like, wow, everyone should give me more money because I'm building this thing that's so amazing that it might kill us all. I still think, like, just questionable. It's questionable. Please stop doing it. You're not watching this podcast. You're very busy. But if maybe someone show this person a clip, stop doing it. Stop saying that.
I think their comms teams are listening to this podcast, so it's hopefully that'll get through.
Yeah, stop doing that. When I was I got started in consulting, and we used to have to take trainings on change management. And whenever there was going to be like a big change, they'd be like, you got to identify the burning platform and you got to identify the beach. And the burning platform is the reason why you've absolutely got to change. We cannot stay the same. It's not going to work. And the beach is like the party that you get to have when you finally jump off of the burning platform. Like, this is the thing you get people excited about. And like, no one is selling the beach right now. Like, no
Right.
one is telling us why we're excited about AI. And to the extent that they are, they're using language that makes like capital owners excited, like more productivity. But to like someone doing the work, when they hear more productivity, they hear like, wow, sounds like I'm doing a lot more work in the future. Or you have people that are talking so far in the future that it just feels not credible and is not credible. Like, there won't be any work in the future, which is like scary, too far, probably not
Mm.
ever true in anyone listening to this lifetime. And so, like, I just think we've gotten it totally wrong about getting people excited about this stuff in a way that feels like we've totally whiffed the ball.
So then zeroing in on like the creative set, your customers, like how do
Oh,
you sort of think
right.
about that and your messaging and sort of what is the what how do you talk about AI with customers or even like just people,
Well, in
like
the creative world, it's even worse because there
yeah,
you have, like, what you have is like this Twitter feed of just some of the lamest stuff you've ever seen with AI generated video.
right.
And then a bunch of people in the tech world being like, oh my God, Hollywood's dead. And then like anyone who actually like makes video is looking at like this dog surfing and it's just like, I'm super unimpressed by this dog surfing video. Am I insane? Like, why is Hollywood dead because you made a pretty mid video of a dog surfing? Like, this is
Yeah, it's like
bad.
it's a standalone thing that on its own might be interesting and curious. Show me the movie where that's somehow integrated and it's flawless, and maybe we'll talk.
Yeah, and maybe
Yeah.
we will. And I frankly think that we will. I think that we will start to see generative
Mm.
AI technology in video, like in movies,
Sure.
in Hollywood. We probably already are. Definitely, Netflix is doing this. Like, so I
Mm.
think that we'll see this technology come in, and it's going to be boring. It's going to be boring. It's going to be the way that Pixar changed the way that we all do animation, with like a pretty boring to most people behind the scene change in how animation happens, where it's like, oh, you don't need animators. You have like these computer programmers and like they're creating these models and like they move around. But no one thinks about that. They're just like, wow, Monsters Incorporated was such a good movie. I really liked that story. It made me cry, right? Like that's what gets people excited. It's not the technology that people are using, it's like actually making really cool, admirable, exciting art. And so, like, when I look at the box office right now and I see, like, I don't know when this thing's going to come out, but you have like a movie right now that's doing super well that was made with under $1 million, has already
Right.
made like $250 million at the box office. This is exciting to me. This is a beach. What if the beach for AI and creativity is that you are empowering people to make really exciting original storytelling for under $1 million and get
Mm.
distribution, so that more stories are getting told, more original stories are getting told. We're not going to see just a bunch of $500 million superhero movies in the theater. We're going to get to see like original storytelling and be able to take more bets on early stage filmmakers. I'm excited about that beach, right? Like
Nice.
there's like these are some of the stories you can tell. And then at Descript, because we don't do a lot of this like generative, like there's no real
Mhm.
human in this ad, like we do recorded media. And so a lot of how I talk to people is I say, struggle with your art, not with your tools. Like, we're not trying to replace the art here. We're trying to help make it easier for you to make it. Like, you're still going
Nice.
to need to struggle with that storytelling, but not with the tools that it takes to build that story.
I usually like to end these conversations on things you're hopeful and not maybe concerned about as we go forward. But I feel like you've kind of answered a lot of that in just what you just said there. So I'd be curious to sort of jump off your last point on sort of making things more accessible, and it because I feel like that um, zeroes in on a trend in tool making. And you see this in a lot of different creative apps, but basically it feels like everything's slowly moving away from discrete buttons, menus, sort of hard to find features, and if not overtly like a chat bot, but like conversational, like telling the tool what you want and it sort of figures out
That's right.
what it needs to do it. How far does this idea go? And how like what is even tools, but like even putting aside the script, what does interacting with software look like in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I that's a great question, and one we talk and debate about all the time at Descript. I don't think buttons are going away, but
Hmm.
I think that chat is still on the ascent. I think voice, like the way that I talk to Underlord is I dictate to it. I just find that to be, when I, as you can tell, bit of a rambler, hard for me
Yeah.
to get it into like the five word. That's the difficulty with writing for me, is sitting down and writing what I think
Mhm.
succinctly. And so I turn on the microphone and I just kind of ramble to Underlord and let it know what I want it to do with the video. And it does it. And so
I
I
feel like
think that's,
The AI question of the moment is what do you use to dictate, as opposed to like what's your phone, iPhone or Android or something of the previous
yeah,
era. You know, it's kind of like that's
totally.
the pro move.
Yeah. I use Whisperflow. I love it.
Right there with you.
Uh, but then I think that buttons aren't going away. Buttons and dials are important for people who need control and want to get in there and just set things the way that they want them. I'm excited about kind of UI on the fly, where you can
Mm.
actually, the computer is smart about generating the right buttons and dials at a moment's notice to like help you. If it's easier to turn a dial and I'm talking to you and I'm like, hey, I need more confetti in this shot. Maybe it generates more confetti in this shot. And it also gives me a confetti knob where it's like, okay, I put in more confetti, but if it's not right, just turn the knob or the dial to the right amount of confetti. You would never need a confetti knob, but because it's so trivial to generate software in the future, it can actually just generate that knob for you in a moment's notice to give you the control. But buttons and knobs, those are really useful for high level control, which you're always going to need for precision editing.
Nice. Yeah, I think some people might need a confetti knobs. A lot of people edit wedding videos, so that could be a thing. Laura, this has been fantastic. I want to just say thanks so much for dropping by the Media Copilot here and sharing your thoughts. A lot to absorb, but this has been great. I really appreciate you coming out.
Pete, thanks so much for having me. A really great conversation, and yeah, I look forward to chatting again soon.
For sure. Thanks for listening to my conversation with Laura Burkhauser, CEO of Descript. And thanks again to Descript for sponsoring this episode of the Media Copilot. To explore whether Descript is right for your team, head on over to descript.com. That's descript.com. The Media Copilot is a podcast, and it would be fantastic if you could give the show a star rating if you're listening on Spotify, a like and a subscribe if you're on YouTube, and a review if you're on Apple. All those things really do help the show because they put the podcast in front of more people. The Media Copilot podcast is produced by Muso Media. Look for their link in the show notes, and don't forget to subscribe to the Media Copilot newsletter as well. Thanks again for being here, and be seeing you in the future.